Okay, so hello everyone. I am Cosmin, Costinas from Parasite and the curator of Garden of Six Seasons exhibition. And it gives me great pleasure to host this discussion with this amazing group of artists who have been with us in Hong Kong throughout the most difficult months of this year. So before we start, and especially since the exhibition is only going to be up here today and tomorrow Hong Kong time. So for everyone in Hong Kong, I'm inviting you to see it if you haven't in these remaining days. But yeah, I would really like to first tell all the artists, to thank them for being part of the conversation, to being part of the exhibition, but to mention what a great privilege it has been to have their work live with us and accompany it through all the tumult and the upheavals of the past month. So really big thank you for that. So we will not do introductions because you all know who they are and you can easily find out from our website and from many other places. We will first go through. We'll invite all of them to introduce their work in the exhibition briefly, and then we will start a discussion. I will have some questions for each one of them, and hopefully we'll have like a group conversation as well.
How do you see me?
But I would first like to invite all of them to introduce their work. And we wanted to start alphabetically with Korakrit, who seems to have walked. Here he is. So we'll start alphabetically. So I'll ask Korakrit first to let us know a little bit about his work in the exhibition. Thank you. Korakrit, if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, cool. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
There's just construction going on. Sorry. So my work in the show is called, it's a video installation called No History in a Room Filled with People with Funny Names Spies. And the video installation is essentially kind of an exploration on storytelling, and it's a conversation between me and this character called the Ghost, to explore this relationship essentially of like between the ghost, a host, and a site of and the act of possession or being engaged in a ritual. And the video is it's inspired by this tradition in northern Thailand called the ghost cinema, which is a ritual where monks would project movies on temple walls and invite ghosts to come and watch the movie as the main audience, and then people would come watch the movies, and in a way the kind of projected movie becomes this sort of channel that connects the audience with this ghost audience. And I was trying to use this setup as a and this story of these 13 kids that got stuck in a cave in Thailand, and essentially all these different kind of points of power came to the rescue, like the military, the king, the monks, Christian missionary, Elon Musk, American military. Just a lot of people came in to kind of build this narrative of the essentially like the caregiver, you know, like this giving, this caring, saving figure, and this kind of bigger story of how a population or people will kind of always need like saving. And I was trying to use the story of the kids that are stuck in the cave to talk about sort of the national identity of Thailand, that was built during sort of in collaboration with American CIA during the Cold War, and like kind of like the last king that passed away a few years ago. And because that sort of history is kind of just completely hidden from textbooks and stuff. And so I was trying to use this parallel and like very similar power structure. I feel like collaborated to create that story. And I was just kind of trying to like draw a parallel story. But yeah, so that's about it. There's a time limit, right?
Yeah, that's fine. Good. We can discuss more later. I have many questions for you. So thank you. So then I'll invite Andrew Thomas Huang to talk about his piece.
Yeah, my name is Andrew, and my film that in the exhibition is called Kiss of the Rabbit God. It's about a Fujianese 18th century god that visits a Chinese American restaurant worker, and it's a sexual coming of age story. It's a 14-minute film, and it's in dialogue with the one kind of queer Chinese deity worshipped in Taipei. So yeah, that's the work.
Thank you. Okay, so then yeah, Citra, would you like to jump in then?
Okay, thank you, Cosmin. My artwork called Timur Merah Project 2 is the second series of Timur Merah Project. Title Harbor of Restless Spirit. Maybe to explain more about this series, I would like to share a presentation. Can I share the screen? I would like to explain more about Balinese art too, to get more understanding about how this artwork become ongoing project of my Timur Merah project, because it is a long-term project that I want to investigate about the missing narration or missing narration, and then the narration that marginalized, such as woman in the old text and then old painting in Bali. How can I share screen here? Wait. Oh, yeah. Did you see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so it's starting when I try to investigate about the Balinese ancestors that come from migration from Java to Bali when the end of the Indic Kingdom, Majapahit. So when they migrate to Bali, they take all the priests, the aristocrat, and then the important texts, and that become the base of Balinese social system until now, and then the system of spirituality and the ritual. And then this is Kamasan painting that come from the illustration of the text, the canonical text that come from that migration, and display in the architecture, and that become access for common people to get the narration from the visual, because the original text only can access by the people who live in the palace, and then for only for the priests. So we are common people cannot access and read the text because the language is from Javanese old language. And then from Timur Merah project, is my way to criticize this text, because this text that come to Bali around 14th century, mostly recorded the writer is man, no woman a writer for this text. And the text that valid is a text that written in the palace. So everything written in the outside palace is not considered important text. So this is what I want to criticize, because the text only glorifying the power of king, the power of high caste people, and then if there's about a woman, it's only portray them as a sexual object, like this series, the fragment of another old Kamasan painting that I found in the Gunarse Museum in Klungkung area, east of Bali, only portray a sexuality and woman as fertile symbol and for reproduction. Or if the narration about intellectual woman, powerful woman, they portray as monstrous feminine, like this one. So they are destructive and then portray as a scary woman with ability, assume in a negative way. So in Timur Merah project, I'm trying to make the contra narration of this old narration and become my political way to bring out the visual that is still in like primordial visual. So people see as like it's from the text that not that I say before, the marginalized text. So this is the first Timur Merah project, the embrace of my motherland. So here I make a new narration from narration that I collected. So I get a lot of narration from not only from the text, but from oral narration too. So here I put all together and make like new story. So this painting and the text also started from the history of creation, and then the birth of the first human, like this. So and then how the first human have the journey, it's like a epic story that I copying the form or the system of the old painting and the old narration into this installation. So here also I put the story of my opinion about the history in Indonesia. So it's not about based on the text. So I put fiction and opinion and text of prophecy, like the first come of colonial to Indonesia. So I portray it here. That already written in the text of Kebo Iwo poetry. We call it Kebo Iwo poetry in Bali in 13th century. Before the kingdom Majapahit defeated, Kebo Iwo ever cursed the Majapahit kingdom that they the Nusantara will defeated by the white people. That's the text writing about. So in here, all Timur Merah project, all the figure from mainly men in the old painting, I change it into woman as main character and the protagonist. So all the painting is in woman's figure. So here is the one to exhibit in Parasite. It's about the season and Balinese mythology about the nature cycle. And I also translating the old poetry that written in 14th century in Bali that usually sang in our ritual as a prayer, as gratitude for nature, because they bring good harvest, they bring good season. So this season in Bali, we know 10 season before we know Gregorian calendar. So we are have a technology to read nature, the sign of nature from the wind, from the sun, not based on the Gregorian calendar. And then I would like to share my next Timur Merah project, Timur Merah project 3, Ode to the Sun, and the last one, Timur Merah project 5, The Verge of Mortal Ground, is about disease. So here I portray the narration about a woman who invented ritual when the disease spread in the world. So it's also surprising for me when I exhibit this artwork in January, Ode to the Sun. There's a lockdown in the world, and then I considered Ode to the Sun is a corona from the sun, not coronaviruses. And then we are facing this crisis. So it's kind of surprise because after that, we are back to nature, we are back to herbal and traditional medicine to bring our immune to prevent any other viruses. So this artwork is talk about the traditional method of medicine and traditional way to healing, kind of that. I think that's all I can share for a moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Citra, and we'll continue the conversation of your work a little bit later. So I want to invite Tanji Hao to introduce his work in the show.
Hi. Hi. Thanks, Cosmin. So, well, basically, the work is the Skeleton of Makara. And Makara generally is a mythical chimera stemming from early Hindu-Buddhist tradition. Usually the creature has an elephant trunk, a crocodilian body, a peacock, or fishtail. Sometimes it is equipped with dragon claws. But there's really no one way to represent the Makara, because depending on the region, different cultures tend to visualize Makara differently. And sometimes they name it differently. So the research on Makara and the work, the Skeleton of Makara, is basically the chimera, the mythical animal represented in the form of a skeleton. And I think I'm interested to address some key issues in the political contestation of history, which is usually, in this particular region, usually filtered through a nationalistic optic. And by appropriating that museological exhibitionary framework, by playing with the incompleteness of a display skeleton or the fossil, right? Because the Makara is presented as a skeleton, but parts of it were missing. By playing with this incompleteness and parts of it, the conception of fossil, incomplete fossil, I think I'm also thinking about the fossilization of history, historical amnesia, as well as the personification of ideas that were once much more fluid in Southeast Asia. So, so in my research, I've always approached Makara from a longue durée perspective, right? Meaning over a span of centuries, over a vast geographical range, which then the moment you begin to see an iconography from this longue durée perspective, you begin to expose the fragility of sovereign national culture, which are really fabricated fictions of belonging. And I think it's always fascinating to see how the form of Makara changes according to different locality, how this iconography is being constantly translated, retranslated when it travels across South and Southeast Asia. I think, for example, right, we generally see Makara as a predominantly Hindu-Buddhist mythical animal, but you also find it manifested on the hilt of an Islamic Malay weapon, for example, or even flanking the Allah inscription on Persian processional standard. So it's a very versatile icon. And I think this migration of ideas itself offers quite an imaginative field that defies national boundaries as much as methodological nationalism. Yep.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite Katerina Taiwa to walk us through her work. Katerina, you would have to unmute yourself. Still muted. Then maybe, Kaman, can you do that remotely? Hello?
Hi, I'm so sorry. It wouldn't let me unmute.
No problem. Now,
I was not given permission to unmute myself.
Sorry about that, but we can hear you loud and clear.
That's okay. I was like, whoa, I am in Zoom prison right now. No agency. Kamna Maori and Nisambula Vinaka, everyone. I'm Katerina Taiwa. I'm coming to you from Canberra, from Ngunnawal and Ngambri Indigenous country here in Australia. I am from Fiji and Kiribati, and also of African American heritage. I'm also an academic, and the work that is featured in Garden of Six Seasons is called Minelands from Terracea, for Terracea, sorry. It's a video installation, and it's one that tells the story of parts of my 20-year-long research into the impacts of phosphate mining on Banaba in the middle of the Pacific in what is now Kiribati, which is a country that is very much under threat of rising sea levels from climate change. Banaba, though, is a slightly higher island. So most of the islands in Kiribati are 2 meters, around 2 meters, so just a few feet above sea level. Banaba is a much higher island, and it's almost completely made of phosphate. And historically, phosphate is something that has been used a lot in global agriculture for fertilizer. So global mass agriculture heavily utilized phosphate to increase global agricultural yields. So Banaba became quite valuable for the British Empire in the Pacific and was mined over an 80-year period. So my film uses archival footage from the 1930s. Phosphate mining began in 1900, but the company took some amazing footage of the mining operation in the 1930s, and I weave this footage together with images of the island in the present to show the impacts of that mining on the body of the land and also the body of the people. So the Banabans who were impacted and displaced from the island because of the mining. And within that story is the very strong and very widespread Pacific idea that land and people are not separate but connected. So whatever happens to the land happens to the people, and vice versa. So in for Banabans, the concept that brings both land and people together is Teaiwa. And you find this concept all across the Pacific, where land and people are part of one complex. And it's not kind of like that Western, vague, all-inclusive kind of concept of nature, but actually very specific land, specific places that we're talking about in the Pacific. So it's not this idea that, oh, islanders are part of nature and harmoniously connected like that. I'm talking about a concept of identity where people are emplaced in very specific places. So that's the concept of land that we're talking about. So you can't cut and paste people and move them around to some different islands and they magically become part of nature of those other islands. We're talking about very deeply rooted ancestral ideas about being connected to place. So my 3-screen video project kind of plays with these ideas of indigeneity, of temporality, of place, and ideas about migration, diaspora, uprooting, and what it means for people to flow across, different parts of the world, but also how materially their lands and rocks, in this case, their rocks also flow. So a lot of people had done work about Banaba and the impacts of mining, but really only focused on people, whether it was the white people who were involved in the mining or the islanders or the laborers. And no one had really thought about what it meant to look at this island from the perspective of the land as another agent participating in this imperial and colonial history. So my film tries to foreground the land, the island, and then kind of take you across time and space and place and cut and paste between the past and the present to show how this disruption of place and this disruption of land then results in a disruption of culture, the social, the political, the people, so on and so forth. So it is based on a poem that my late sister wrote called Mine Lands, and it's a play on this idea of collective versus individual ownership. So literally the land was mined, but also it is mine in terms of a more individualistic sense of possession of a place, and an instrumentalist kind of approach to place, which is what Christianity, colonialism, and imperialism kind of brought to this particular island and culture. It is also obviously my ancestral land. So within the narrative, within the story that's kind of played out, the montage that's played out across this 3-screen video project is this sense of the ancestors kind of watching and experiencing what has happened to the island with the viewer. And also it foregrounds the act of consumption that comes with this particular history. So agriculture isn't just agriculture. Agriculture is about consuming, places. It's about consuming certain kinds of products that very specifically come through global commodity chains that are from places. So there's a whole narrative of consumption operating in there too. And I signal that through the music that I use and other kinds of devices in the 3-screen projection. And yes, it then weaves in with that archival footage, ethnographic film that that I made 20 years ago when I was just starting out with my research. It kind of weaves all of those together so that you end up getting 100-year, like a century-long picture of what happens to an island when you mine it so heavily in such a awfully extractive way. And you can see kind of like the demise of the island over the 100 years. And in the background, you also get this sense that it actually took millions of years for that island to form in the first place. So it's kind of this parable for things like climate change and what is happening to the planet now, but kind of focused on the tiniest possible island in the Pacific that you could imagine. It's 2.5 square miles, so it's 6 square kilometers. And you kind of get this idea about scale and how the very small matter in a very huge way, and how the very big and the it's just a play between those two different scales of interaction between the very small island and the whole like global agricultural development history. So I think about my work in terms of a multi-sited and a multi-scalar, I suppose, kind of storytelling about the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. Yes, and I think now you're, with all the other speakers, you're a co-host, so you can mute and unmute yourself at your own will.
I can mute and unmute.
Yeah, thank you. So last but not least, before we move into the discussion, I would like to invite Brittney Leeanne Williams to introduce her work.
Hi. Hi, everyone. So I'm Brittney Leeanne Williams. I'm speaking to you on Zoom from Chicago. My work, I've been working on this series or body of work since 2017. I think within the show, I have 2 paintings and 3 works on paper, something like that. And so, yeah, in 2017, I started creating this bent form, or this, at the time, exhausted or tired form. So this female body was kind of contorted or bent over and exhausted. And I think it's expanded so much more since then. I'm now thinking about how this shape, or this kind of curved back, or this bent back, kind of expresses the woman's experience. She bends in tiredness, she bends in prayer, she bends to pick up her child, she bends in oppression, she bends to bridge communities. And so I think that there's this kind of, it's dynamic. I like that this posture is dynamic and can reveal many gestures or many actions. When I was in a residency when I first started playing with this form. And then when I got back to the city, I was really struck by the ambulance siren. The residency I was in, it was kind of in the middle of nowhere, and I hadn't spent a lot of time outside of cities. So it was really striking to come back to Chicago, and a lot of things felt new. But one of the things that really struck me was the ambulance siren and its ability to choreograph the street. It caused individuals to slow down, to halt, and it had this type of authority that I wanted for the Black female experience. So rather than rendering the figure through Black skin, I thought there was an opportunity there. By making the body red as an ambulance siren, the body could not be dismissed. Her experience could not be, it would force the viewer to take note and to recognize what was taking place. At times, the red form might be even the light source within the painting or the work of art. And so then these red bent over forms, or these red contorted figures or women, are outworking this, this posture in various sites. The sites or landmarks are pulled from aspects of from California, my notion of home. So I moved around a lot when I was growing up. And so the places that I live are the building blocks to construct the spaces, these surreal spaces that these forms are engaging with. And so my grandmother's garden comes up a lot. My grandmother had an extensive garden where at the center was this lemon tree, and she had everything from birds of paradise to bougainvillea to even a rose garden, which is like a big deal and an impossible thing, like feat to have. And then I also spent a great time in the high desert, and specifically Victorville, California. And so that comes up into the work, this kind of desert scape. And I actually have quite a strong emotional association or affiliation with these sites. And so they become symbolic, a representation of a psychological state. I often ask myself if grief was a place rather than a psychological state. What would it look like? What would that place look like? What would be the climate, the temperature, the geography of that site? And that's how I'm kind of building these outdoors or outsides but really it's hinting to the inside or what's taking place internally or emotionally. So yeah, that's a little bit about the work that's in the show.
Thank you, Brittney. All right, so thank you all for the introduction. So then I have a few questions or one or two questions for each one of you, and then hopefully we can also have a conversation. So first, if any of the other artists want to sort of like intervene in the discussion with whatever other artists we're talking about, please feel free and unmute yourself and you know, think that this is a dinner party in person. Remember those. So yeah, I would like to ask Katerina first. Because, and this is, I think, like relevant to the discussion of most of your works, that nations and communities are often represented employing the metaphor of a body, and so is nature, at least in the Western sense. It often is represented as a body. So then various forms of manifesting individuality or dissidence in relation to a community's norm or a community's tradition can thus be seen as forms of queering that body, that metaphorical body of the nation. And in the case of Banaba, so Banaba's community and nature were physically removed and appended to this, to the extent that the Banaba nation as body is no longer a metaphor. You know, the scars and the damage is as real as it gets. So yeah, I think in the context of this very extreme actualization of metaphors with which we often work in decolonial discourses, so when that becomes so real to this extent, how does your work on Banaba fit into this sort of like broader work of untangling colonialism and finding the right words to describe these processes of oppression and liberation?
Thanks, Cosmin. I think there's one kind of like a major way in which I'm questioning some of the assumptions from an indigenous perspective. So within the context of decolonization work in our part of the world, in the Pacific, it's often along these lines of settler colonialism and the relationship between settler colonials and the people of the land, right? The indigenous peoples of a particular place. But the as you say, the very real kind of thing that happens to Banaba is that, well, first, it's not a settler colony, and a lot of the discourses about decolonization tend to come out of those particular places with settler colonial history. So it's not a settler colony, but also because both land and people are displaced, it questions the very nature of what indigeneity is and how we can incorporate maybe diverse or nuanced concepts of indigeneity into a decolonial, into decolonial work in the present, so that folks like Bonobans who have this like double displacement can still retain that sense of the ancestral rooting and connectedness to where they come from. So this idea of the specificity of indigeneity is always rooted in very specific landscapes. So it's that mountain, that river, those rocks, not like vague other rocks and mountains and rivers, but really specific mountains and rivers and rocks, because your ancestors have been buried there for hundreds, and in our part of the world, thousands of years. So that the spiritual, ancestral, like embodied resonance with the place is reinforced through the ancestral connections. So the case of Bonobo makes one question: what happens to the people and the culture when the land is removed as well? So the ground in which you may make claims to your indigeneity also is dispersed and starts flowing across the globe and being consumed by countless folks across actual settler colonies. What does it mean then for indigeneity? So while being very committed to decolonial work and action, I try to ask these difficult questions about then what is our relationship, say, for example, to the people of Australia, the Indigenous people of Australia and New Zealand, of whom are coming from communities and societies that have, I hate to use the word, but literally consumed our land in a very material way, in that it goes into the fertilizer spread across the farms wheat and grain and lamb and beef and all of these other commodities flow out of that land. If you stick to concepts of indigeneity and the indigenous narrative, for me, you have to follow the story of the land. It's not just about the land over there back in the Pacific, but it's about all the rocks, because the bones of our ancestors are woven into and integrated into those rocks. And interestingly enough, in terms of the history of phosphate and phosphate extraction for agriculture, before large-scale phosphate mining, people used to dig up human bones from the graves and crush them up and spread them across farmland. So it's not a fantastical stretch. It's actually what human societies used to do. They used to rob graves in order to get access to the phosphorus in the bones and use it in their gardens, use it to grow food for their people. So I really challenge these metaphors of bodies, of lands, of humans, of cultures and societies, and maybe force people more to take a very materially based kind of understanding about who we are, how we relate to each other, and the impacts on that in terms of things like environmental, ecological, cultural, social, historical justice. How do Bonobans like us get justice for what's happened to our island, given the specificities of our story? And I think it opens up the space of decolonization, so that both places and peoples, environments and humans, cultures and rocks have to be considered. They have to be considered. They can't be unhooked from each other and like, let's fight for justice for the people. you have to fight for the justice of places and lands and landscapes and environments as well. So I think that's what I'm trying to do in my work.
Thank you very much for this very compelling answer and powerful. I have another question for you, which is, I know it's something that we chatted a little bit about, and it's a little bit less directly at the core of your work, but it's I think also interesting for the rest of the panel, because I'm curious to know how is in your view tradition negotiated between its value as a maker of community, as a form of resistance in an indigenous and colonized context, and on the other hand, in its normative function that is to be resisted or subverted or queered by various dissident bodies and identities from within that community. And I know that this is sometimes a conflict in several places. There's also various ways of making this into a very creative and productive process and liberating process. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think I try not to fall into the romanticization of some kind of former tradition or custom or culture that has been lost and needs to be revived, for example. But I think the Barnabas story asks us what the function is of tradition, what the function is of tradition and custom or customary culture, especially in indigenous societies, and what kinds of values are actually embedded in them. So this is a constant kind of thing that Pacific Islanders are negotiating for themselves, because Christianity, for example, has become tradition. It has become culture. It has been so deeply woven, into the fabric of what it means to be a Pacific Islander, that Fijians, for example, will say God is Fijian, Samoans will say God is Samoan, and so on and so forth. So tradition is always changing and transforming, absolutely, except that the values that need to be retained are the values that bring us back to ecological and environmental balance, harmony, and integration. So for me, disruptive elements that question or queer or disrupt the framework of traditional structures, those have been happening for hundreds and thousands of years. The difference today is the disconnection from the material basis of that, from the environmental and material basis of custom and culture, so that then you have this transforming, changing culture that is continuously evolving. But the point of anxiety and panic and urgency from them, for me, is when it becomes fully unhooked from place. So regardless of what the changes and the transformations are, the disruptions, the queering and the questioning of the basis of custom or the basis of tradition, if the result of that disruption is to take us away from our absolute integration with trees and plants and animals and rocks and the sky and the ocean, that's when we start getting into existential trouble. So I don't know if that makes sense in terms of an answer to your question, but I think I understand what you're asking, but I'm going back to my previous kind of argument, which is that we're in danger now because of the unhooking from place. And it's not a romantic relationship. There's nothing romantic about living and working and being a form of being that is sustainable, that is, doesn't treat everything as a resource for extraction to maximize profits or maximize wealth or maximize something else that has nothing to do with survival of the species. So for me, the question is, where does transformation of custom and culture and tradition take us? What is the actual value behind it? So I absolutely support all forms of justice for, things that bring us back to a sense of harmony and balance in the least romantic form of harmony and balance, but more of a kind of a sense of survival and resilience.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'd like to sort of like move to Korakrit and to ask him a question that I think also derives from his work, but is also like very relevant in the context of the current situation of Thailand and the incredible protests that have been happening for the past months that have been really an source of inspiration and hope in many other places in Asia as well. But I'm curious to hear you speak more about what's happening now in Thailand and the protest for democracy and for a different I guess like relationship between the different elements that compose the idea of the nation and of the state can also be seen from a queering perspective, because generally nations, and this is the case of almost all nations built on those modern romantic ideas, are patriarchal structures where there's ideas of power, of strength, of unity, of discipline, manifest in both the ideology and in the aesthetic of nations. So then, and that sort of like patriarchal united body, when one is opposed, one is dissident from it, there is a form of queering. And then various forms of political dissidence can be seen as forms of queering from that normative manifestation of power. And of course, the case of Thailand with the ubiquitous presence of the king, of the male king, of the military, and the way in which ideas of unity and discipline are staged and choreographed and rehearsed, makes that, I guess, general patriarchal quality of nations even more visible. So how do you feel about looking at the current protest movement and many elements around it that are also like present in your film, of course, as an act of collective queering of the national body?
Well, yeah, I guess in a way the current king that the students and the population's protesting right now is he's the son of the last king who reigned for like 70 years, pretty much since like kind of like a little bit like post Cold War, and in the construction of actually the story of essentially that this king continued from the last king. Essentially, it was in a. It's hard to like grasp the whole story because they made laws where, first of all, like all the royal family and the king exists in this different plane where you can't really, it's illegal to talk about it and they jail people. But essentially the king is they kind of to kind of tighten the borders and like bring power to the center. They sort of collaborate in this big PR campaign that is the last king, and they like essentially merge him with Buddhism. They made it like the national kind of religion. They also kind of almost made him essentially a demigod, but also as this promoted also as a kind of like a father to the country, so the idea where like the land belongs to essentially this father who is ever giving. He gives you the land, he gives you agricultural technology, he teaches you like what crops to grow. He and you have an image of him everywhere, and he's just kind of like like gracious enough to let you live in the land. and gracious enough to give you democracy, you know, but he's kind of not included in this whole he's not within like the container of democracy and within like that, you know, he's just like kind of somewhat exists outside of it. But on the actual reality side is like that entire group of people like own 20% of the, you know, the GDP and don't pay tax, and actually it's completely intertwined with the military. Like Thailand has like one military coup every like 10 years probably on kind of like average. So yeah, and so his power vein like kind of vein down as people start to like kind of develop more like language, and you know, as like there's more information around, and the propaganda kind of like, you know, slowly faded. And now his son, who's pretty he's, you know, he's like really determined to kind of continue and even more like pull in power into sort of this like himself and the institution. So he's like so yeah, so there's been a lot, it's pretty much happened, it's been like brewing for a while, but pretty much happened since kind of COVID COVID time, where like the economy is like super like bad right now and everyone's unemployed. And it's mostly been it's actually many interesting things about it. I would say for me the angle that seems the most interesting is that the king himself exists in this place where you kind of like, you sort of can't talk about him directly, or else they jail you immediately. So everything that's been, the ways in which the protesters has been trying to kind of maybe communicate with each other, or like build a new narrative, or like a more realistic stories, has been very much like symbolic, and almost like using lots of kind of symbolic acts, performances, fiction. For example, the whole kind of the whole symbol of the protest is like when people do this, which is like from the movie Hunger Games, you know. And I find it just the idea where like similar to what I was talking about, how in the work No History in a Room for People with Funny Names, I was trying to use the metaphor of the ghost to essentially talk about, like, you know, the ghost is the military, the ghost is the king, the ghost is also like the invisible hand of America during the Cold War, you know. But to talk to the ghost, you know, which exists in a different plane, sometimes, you know, you have to like watch a movie with the ghost, or like the movie becomes this like medium that somehow like exists in like these kind of parallel but like not connecting world. So in ways where to talk to the king, sometimes you need you know, a revolution that kind of, you need to like use the narrative of Hunger Games, you know, where like democracy is given if essentially the people sacrifice their like blood, essentially, you know. And then a lot of it feels like this protest is also it's just been, it's like kind of like it's sort of like, maybe it goes with the time, what's happening like everywhere in the world right now, but it's not just the protest against the king or the military, but like the like LGBTQA community has completely joined. Pretty much anything that anyone sort of like can't, like all the forces that are, you know, queer, and like all the forces that sort of you couldn't really like talk about, or did not have kind of a space, like once a month there'll be justice. For example, the princess, like the daughter of the king, is a fashion designer. So the other last week she had a fashion show that was actually paid for by actually tax money. And parallel to that, the protesters were kind of closed down an entire street in front of it and did another fashion show. where it's almost like an open call kind of, not even open call. They just pretty much put a runway down, and anyone who wanted to kind of like perform could perform. You know, there's been a lot of kind of, there's been like a really strong kind of like rap against dictatorship movement.
Sorry to interrupt. And they could like wear whatever they wanted on this catwalk.
It was more than that. It was more like actually people were almost like performing as well. First of all, there was like there was like a drag show, but also people were dragging as essentially the royal family, and then everyone else who came to the protest were kind of also like bending down to the ground and praying to the, you know, the performers as well. So like in terms of imagery, or in terms of like creating imagery and like memeness, it's just so now they have like the militaries kind of figure out this sort of what's it called? They pretty much figure out that the protests will happen like all the time in all these different sites. So they'll like prepare like anti-riot, like water guns. It's like really sarcastic because first the protesters were like throwing blue paint at all these like blues, like being royal. So they would pour, you know, they would like found out some kind of like police military corruption scheme, and they would like go like just throw blue paint at you know, the royal military offices. And then there was this one big incident where the anti protest police were just like shooting blue water at the blue chemical water at the protesters, and they had this blue paint where essentially you would just like, if you got the blue water on yourself, you would just stay blue for like a week or two, you know. And in terms of the protesters, that was definitely like almost I mean that was definitely kind of like the king's also like really like, he really exists in that in this other plane that's fantasy plane as well. You know, he most of the time lives in Germany, wears a crop top, you know, with like lots of fake tattoos. He had like a poodle that's a general, an army general. There's like Pornhub is now banned in the country. Pornhub is now banned in the country because there's a video of his ex-wife naked, like presenting a birthday cake to the poodle that's on Pornhub. But so essentially it's interesting because I feel like actually it's almost as if this king himself is really pretty much queering the image of his like father, you know, this role that he's trying to fulfill, you know, while trying to kind of do like, you know, like believing that the kind of like kingship military complex that was built and strengthened for the past like 70 years is completely solid and will just kind of like, you know, protect his like interests and still like consolidate his power, you know. But I truly believe like right now more than ever that like, you know, this will really the culture has changed completely, and because it's like a student movement, like I truly believe that like there'll be no more king in Thailand in like I don't know how long. Like it's hard to say, but yeah. So now interestingly, like there's lots of performance. People paint themselves blue, and it's like, you know, it hasn't gone like really kind of violent on the student side, which is, you know, also why it feels like there's been critiques on oh, if this student revolution, this student protest will actually achieve anything, because it seems like not a lot of bargaining power. But I think what is actually happening is this, you know, like essentially in the past like months, like you've just seen the entire image that was built by you know, this kingship, like partially by the king and partially by like the students and the people sort of creating like fictions and memes like, you know, like the last protest was at all the protests are like now flash protests. So they'll kind of send out a meme at 4 p.m. where to gather, you know. And the last protest was kind of memed after the like the you know, like kind of like the Avengers Endgame sort of scenario where, you know, suddenly all the Avengers like just gather in one place kind of thing, you know. It's like really interesting. And it really communicates, and like more and more people come, and yeah, and I think it's really, if you know, the kind of America, Thai neoliberal kind of like ultimate product that happened was the last king, you know, and his kind of reign, and you know, it's completely now with the new king and all the information and all the fictions that like we can employ around. I feel like that soft power that that they built has completely been destroyed, literally so much, even in the past like month. And yeah, and I think it's now that institution like, you know, only has, yeah, it has military, it has all these power, it has a lot of money, but without its soft power, it's pretty much like useless. And yeah, so I think it's amazing what's happening.
Well, maybe that's actually like similar to what happened in the States, and how that, you know, the latest presidency also like destroyed the edifice of power and of the Cold War Imperial American presidency as well, you know, by taking that both to the extreme, but also subverting it and ultimately collapsing into itself and into its
yeah. And I think, yeah, and also it's very similar. It's very similar in the States in a way where now the, you know, where the king and the military institution, for its very patriarchal and very kind of like, you know, like ways in which it exists has now become, you know, this like ideal kind of like right wing, you know, like figure for everyone else, you know, for everyone else who want democracy, want freedom of speech, want just like more space to be queer, want, you know, like everything, like from like people want, like, let's say like gay marriage in Thailand, you know, like now everyone's on this side, you know, and it feels a little bit like the, you know, the Trump scenario, how, you know, it's become that. So you're right, yeah.
Good, thank you. So I'd like to move to Andrew and to ask him, well, a little bit a question on the same lines as the second question I asked Katerina, and about, yeah, how you see the role of tradition and in processes of individual emancipation, and how to reconcile that call to preserve tradition and identity and lineages with the imperative of queerness and that of constructing one's own self and path and identity. And I guess I'm also like particularly interested of like how this tension might work in a diasporic context versus a non-diasporic one. And I'm also curious of like if you've encountered any of these complexities or reactions regarding your work in the broader communities in which you showed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I remember someone once said that to be of Chinese diaspora is to feel like you have a missing limb, you know, like to feel that you have, there's like a ghost feeling, there's like a schism and like I'm second generation. So, you know, my grandmother is the one that immigrated, and even, you know, in the process of assimilating intergenerationally, you know, I actually just went back to our ancestral village like 9 months ago, and it's already in the process of being gentrified and erasing itself, where the buildings are literally being hollowed out in the ancestral village. And so I think that for those of us who have who are intergenerational diaspora, like, I think that sometimes invention is all we have. I mean, there is still text. Like I did consult, you know, various academic sources to find this Fujinese god, you know, this, and he's not even, Tuer Shen, the god, is not even that old. You know, he was only written as a fictional character in the 18th century. So, but still that god is deified and still worshipped. And you know, it was important for me to create a work that was in actual dialogue with the representation of that god, you know, and actually portrayed it in a way that was both somewhat accurate, but also this is, you know, a story taking place. And at the time we filmed it last year in 2019, and I think that the only way to revive it and address it and make it real is to make it contemporary and to bring invention and to create an imagined history for it. And the same that we have to create an imagined history for ourselves sometimes, you know, those of us who are of the diaspora. But I think, again, that question is a rift. And I think maybe like what was mentioned earlier, we have to be careful not to romanticize that tradition or that history. At the same time, we have to engage with it seriously.
Also more curious if you can talk a little bit about the body marking part in the film, and where does that come from? And I don't know if you can talk more about that metaphor, because it's such a powerful moment and quite unexpected as well in the dynamic.
Yeah.
Obviously that stirs a lot of the emotions, and also because I mean, in the context of our discussion, because it seems to be like a you know, something ritualic, but it's obviously not you know, not something that you would necessarily encounter in Chinese tradition as such. So there's also that aspect of an invented tradition, which is very interesting, and it's also part of, you know, many queer strategies. So and it's also something present in your work in other parts. So I'd also like to ask you about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, again, as someone second generation who doesn't speak the language, and even if I did speak the language, it would be a village dialect that very few people speak. So I think in trying to translate this idea, this story is about a character learning to be embodied. You know, a character that feels invisible, and the whole film is about this journey of embodiment. So when you don't even have the language, then all you've got is, you know, your flesh and blood, and the only way to portray that visually was through this act of, you know, like ritual scarification. And so that was really it was a dramatic device as much as it was, I think, an instinct. When again, I don't even have the language, but I want to connect literally my, you know, flesh and blood and the body embodiment of this character to his heritage. And the mandala on the chest was, it was also inspired by a William Blake poem, actually, where it says eternity is love with the productions of time. And so I wanted to actually translate that poem in Chinese seal script. So I just did some research and found, some Chinese seal script characters, and created, you know, like a mandala of love around the symbol of eternity in the center. So I think it was also just, you know, that was a personal, again, invention that I took liberty to do and combine, you know, ideas that I'd been thinking about. But so yeah, again, that's just an example of invention. And I am curious, you know, as I did present the work at the temple in New Taipei City. And, you know, I was confronted with real questions, you know, for those who actually worship this God on these choices. And so that was, you know, a moment of reckoning where I am confronting heritage, you know, head on. And so, you know, it is interesting, that collision.
What were those questions? Or like, was it, what kind of position was there? Was there hostility? Was there curiosity? Was there
A bit of both. Yeah, a bit of both. I mean, one of the major questions was asked from the master of the temple was, why do you have a character who is, committing self-harm? And because from a Taoist context, that is actually considered unfilial. And that's education for me. I didn't know that. But again, I think as someone who is second generation, there's my own ignorance, but there's also, it was interesting when I spoke to the master of the temple, he was interested in creating another temple to worship this god in San Francisco, because of San Francisco's history of being a city with so much queer history. And, there's still the mythology of that history on the West Coast still, pervades even, I don't know. I think it was interesting. I think there was a disconnect for both of us, like trying to understand the gap of history for the past few decades. And it was, I would just say it was educational, I think, for both of us.
And is this something that you feel like continuing in your work, and that dialogue with tradition and upholding it, subverting it, and sort of giving it new meanings in the context of your interests?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on a feature film right now. Actually, it's a long journey, but I've currently been workshopping it with the Sundance Institute, and it also involves a lot of research in like queer Chinese mythology. So I am currently still expanding this process of heritage mining, and also again trying to invent reimagine that history for my ancestors and my heritage. So that is going to be part of the larger storyline that I'm exploring.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'd like to ask Citra, because I mean, you gave a very compelling introduction already into your work. So I think a lot of the questions I had were answered. So thank you for that. But I think it's really remarkable the way in which you insert these female figures and female energy and female perspective in these historical and mythological scenes. So I'm also curious to hear what kind of reaction that causes, particularly in the wider community of Bali, which we know that is still highly religious. And were there any tensions? Was that seen as subverting broader norms in society? So I'm curious to hear more about that, and how this painting circulated in Balinese society. Your works. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bali is such a small island where the people still live in the past. So our social system still based on something in the past and our ritual. And then about the reaction of the people, when I bring a new narration about women, they are just curious, and then no contradiction, no specific contradiction, because nudity and then something glorifying woman is still considered our philosophy. Different. The condition is different outside Bali, like Java or more wider art scene in Indonesia, because the situation of radical Muslim in Indonesia, we are seeing a nudity and then something glorifying woman as a prophet, as prophet, like in my artwork, I portray women as prophet. They're like censorship, not really acceptable in outside Bali. But I would like also tell about the reality that happened in Bali, because what people see in art is like not really linked in reality of the people here. Why I choose feminism and bring women into heroism here is kind of my action to response how women live in Bali, such as we are teach from our parents not to being critical, not to dare to say our opinion in society. We are not like included in the making decision in our community. Only men are acceptable, men opinion acceptable in our community. That's why I have long way to question what happened in Bali, why Bali is so patriarchy. That's why when I asked the elder, I asked them, is that the long way before the situation is same like this? And I get some hypothesis. I should start with all this narration, and then how I find the weaknesses from that old narration as a way I manipulate and then try to make a statement from that. Because from that narration, I found that there is a fact, but there's also opinion, improvisation, and then fiction that in my study, it's only accommodate the ideology thinking of the men who live in palace. So their thinking is very central and then not objective, it's very subjective. And then especially for the Balinese painting, mostly painted by men. And for Kamasan painting that I presented, it's actually made in collective, but the one who can master sketch is the one who can read the text, and it's usually men. Women cannot read it and not have access for it. Women usually become a master who coloring the painting. So that's also my question, why women not be put in a central or important role in a society, even in the art scene. And here the art not we not study art in a formal school, but it's in a collective way, and it inheritance from parents to daughter. So here I'm very lucky to meet this controversial lady in Kamasan. She is priest. Her name is Mangku Muryati, and it's forbidden in Bali women who become priests. And so when she are open to become priests, many society are against her. But she now still keep the tradition and still become priest. So I learned the technique, I learned the narration also from her. So in some part it's acceptable, but in some part where people still don't have open mind here, they want to bring what their old believe old ideology, keep remind, and don't want to accept a new thing here. I think that's all I can explain.
Thank you. Just another more brief question. I'm also curious how the the artistic community specifically in Bali also regards your work, and also like your success, of course, because it's a very, you know, male-dominated painting community as well. So I'm also like curious specifically there how you felt received.
Okay, so I challenge myself to go out from the shell in Bali. So and trying to find the answer of the problem, what happened here, especially problem of women, and the stagnant of art scene here, where if you find the painting of women, even in traditional way, into modern and contemporary way, they are only portray women as object and as a sexual figure, as they still romanticizing the colonial point of view, where Balinese women are very exotic. They are nude, postcard that make so many tourists, tourists come to Bali to see it. Like they are going to Bali, they will see a nude woman have bath in river. The thinking of the exotic way make me try to criticize it, and then bring another value of what is woman and Balinese woman actually. So maybe with this artwork, I want to try to hacking the narration, and then bring woman into heroism perspective, and then not only as a sexual figure, not only as a fertile figure, but more in the strong and what I say, empowered figure, as a contra narration of the old text, and then the common way of thinking people here. I think that's all.
Thank you, Citra. Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to ask Jihao, how do you see the structural hybridity of the Makara figure in a contemporary context about gender fluidity, about queering, about transgressing categories? And is that actually like a useful perspective? And actually more specifically, like if that tradition of hybridity of composition can actually like serve to be an indigenous genealogy to a script of queering and transgressing categories today in the cultural context where Makara has been present. And is that maybe like a good starting point for a non-Western set of references and history to be referred to when elaborating querying strategies in Makara countries?
Yeah, well, I think there's some relevance in the composite figuration of Makara pertaining to queer strategies, I think. Firstly, I think the Makara iconography in Hindu traditions, they belong to a broader cosmology involving divinities as well as mythical figures in composite form, right? So an example is the Ardhana Ishwara, which is basically a deity who is half male and half female, right? It's usually split evenly down the middle upon the central axis, so it has only a single breast, and usually their clothing is different, so half male and half female. So it is basically an androgynous deity consisting of Shiva and Parvati. But I think we have to bear in mind that this androgyny is not equal, right? Because the word Ardhana Ishwara actually translates into the Lord, who is half women, which implies that the Lord is always a male, right? So gender exists in a hierarchy. And I think this is a general concern for artists working with traditional sources of knowledge. And I think what Katerina has also talked about. On one hand, they may provide moments of rejoice. On the other hand, I think the system of knowledge is also deeply rooted in the system of patriarchy. And it's also based on a political system of order and control, right? For example, the Makara as a composite figuration, and also other chimeras and composite beings, right? They're often configured with an intention to bring together distinct elements or distinct communal groups. The Ardhana Ishwara was said to be a result of an authority trying to control or trying to combine two hostile groups in ancient India. So by combining Shiva and Parvati, or sometimes Shiva with Lakshmi, it was intended as this visual representation that unifies different cultic groups. And even for Makara, right, in Sri Lanka, for example, the Karava communities, they use the Makara as an emblem, as a heraldry. And to some, the figure is said to represent 5 elements, right? The water, the earth, the fire, and so on and so forth. So the composite is always viewed as something that is having more power because it is a unifying force. So it's really kind of like representing something that Indonesia, in Southeast Asia also, they're so obsessed with the idea of unity in diversity, right? Something that is so diverse, a culture that's so diverse, but at the same time, there's a sense of unity in it. And I think I'm using Makara as an iconography. I think it's useful because by itself, the iconography is always in a state of flux. It is always unstable. Because if you're familiar with the way Makara projects force of life, multiple life forms through its mouth, right? Apart from the fact that the Makara iconography, it's a chimera, right? It's composed of different beings. It also originated from a lotus root, a lotus rhizome, right? In a sense that it visually resembles the lotus rhizome. So the way Makara swirls and churns out Baroque-like foliation, it also means that there's something that is inherently, organically vibrating in Makara itself, something that emanates a kind of intensity. So which is why I think Makara is affiliated with the cycle of life, with the cosmic parturition of life, as well as the annihilation of life. And Makara is a liminal figure, right? As with most chimeric figures, they are liminal figures, they are liminal beings, and in a literal sense as well as ontological sense, right? Literally, they are liminal because Makara is usually found decorating the edges of religious monument or sacred apparatus. And ontologically, right, Makara is itself amphibious, right? It's an ontological amphibian because it's a combination of land and water animals. So it is able to travel or carry deities across different cosmic and geographical realms. And in that sense, if you go to some monuments, certain religious monuments like in Indonesia, throughout the region, Angkor Wat, Borobudur, you will find Makara kind of decorating water spouts at the entrance. They are like safeguarding the demarcation between the inside and outside. They are basically the guardian of a threshold. So whichever way you see it, right, generally, literally, ontologically, Makara is kind of curing presupposed boundaries of life and death, of interiority and exteriority, etc. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Yeah, and again, last but not least, I want to move to Brittney. I think this often happens, having a family name with one of the last letters in the alphabet. Your works, you know, unlike the works of some of the artists that we heard, are not querying a particular cultural tradition. But they seem to be like establishing and working from within your own constructed cosmology, which assigns your own significance and power. There's a great deal of power in your works, to the bodies, to the landscapes, to the memories. And you seem to be establishing your own rules of like how an individual occupies space on the canvas, and what the protocols are established there are. So can all these processes of self-constructing and quasi-spiritual order of things, of reorganizing the coordinates of the world, you know, really from the bodies, the insides of the bodies, the cosmos, the landscape, pretty much everything, be regarded as acts of queering in the broader sense of the word, as being subversions of structures of power?
So I would say yes to that, but I like that in mining my own notion of home, or like even the type of figure, right? The type of body is this larger figure. I make myself the center, or like maybe the sun or the nucleus, and everything kind of orbits around me. And so in that, it makes me an expert. I feel as though as I create this kind of visual language, or this visual system or code, by using my own history, by looking to my grandmother's garden as a way to build landscapes, or looking to our time in Victorville as means to construct these spaces. It cannot be, there's no boundary that I need to cross or like educate myself into, because it's my own. I am the expert. And I think that feels very like empowering. I can sit within this world I've built, and feel known, and feel as though I don't need to find a translator or an interpreter for what I'm kind of constructing.
Then just one last question, because it's also a question that we got asked very often as the show was up and as we were like guiding visitors. It's like, what is your relationship to the bodies that are depicted in your works? If they're to a certain degree self-portraits, or are they actually metaphors of something else? Are they even, you know, human characters, like actual individuals, or are they more abstract projections of, let's say, ideas about humanity or about communities, or more visions and clearly defined individuals?
I like to think of the red forms as like a cup, so I can fill it with anything. So as it functions as a vessel, I can place these kind of psychological landscapes or these emotional landscapes within it, but I also can house myself and us in it. It's not necessarily self-portraiture, but rather a tool to place my experience and others, my mother, my grandmother. It is us. I think a lot about like demon possession, or the Trinity, how it can house many, manifold. So I'm definitely thinking of it being a place, a site, to kind of house all of these experiences in one.
Lovely. So I wonder if there are any other questions. I know we've went on for quite a long time with the presentations and the discussion, but I wonder if there are any other questions from the audience, or if any of you have questions to any of the other artists. Okay, well then I guess yes, we covered quite a lot of ground. And is that a question? Yes. Sorry, yes. Can you? No, I do. I have to unmute you. Okay, yeah. Let me see.
Hi.
Hello. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda. I'm calling in from Seattle on Duwamish land. Really appreciated hearing the vast, I think, diversity and breadth of everyone who's presented here. I think as a Asian diasporic person in the United States, it's quite rare to hear artists talk about their work that's not always positioned from like a hegemonic like white gaze. So that was really refreshing. I think I have a question specifically for Andrew, but also maybe other panelists have thoughts, which is sometimes when like the diaspora has like this idea that, you know, if I could only visit my ancestral home, if only I can visit the motherland, then I will really have access to a culture. And, you know, I will have my missing limb. That really resonates. And at the same time, myself and I think other diasporic people who have also done similar projects of home finding also find that the land in which they quote unquote go back to has distinctly changed or has certain norms that really challenge you know, current notions of like what it means to be free or what's just, or still uphold like oppressive or patriarchal values. What is the process for, you know, people as we, you know, both unearth archives, not romanticize things, and sort of how do we sift through what are the things that we want to take and bring forward, and what are the things that we want to renew with our current values? Yeah, I hope that made sense. Yeah. It's a little late over here, but it's I think it's a tricky process, and I think for those of us who grew up in the white dominant society, I think it's hard to know what like that filtering process or that decision making process.
Yeah, I think that's a great question that I think everyone here actually, I feel like touched on these ideas of like, what do we keep and what do we throw away, right? Because revisiting our traditions or ancestry, I think like what was said earlier, it's both celebratory, but there's such deep laden misogyny and violence that led to this point, and that's so laden within those traditions, which are meant to like oppress and control people as well. So I think that's where invention is important, because invention gives us the opportunity to be future facing and corrective, I think. And what you were saying earlier about the desire, to romanticize the idea of going back home, right? Like when I went, it was weird when we first arrived to the village, we were welcomed by some like city administrator who took us to like a museum of the village, but the village museum only featured the architecture. There was absolutely nothing about the music, the culture, the language. And I actually asked through translator, I said, where is all this information? Where's the art? Where's the culture? And his answer was like, no art, no culture. And so it was a very, you know, Beijing answer to my question, you know, like it was, and so I think, yeah, in a way we can't romanticize these things, because it's also, our histories have also been violated and erased, you know. So I think that's why I think you ask a good question, and I think that we have opportunities to be in the process of imagining. We're also doing the process of work that needs to be done, I think, to make a better environment for everybody. But I'm curious to know what other people think of that.
Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, I would like to thank everyone again for your participation in the discussion, and for our audience in Hong Kong, just to invite everyone to come and see the exhibition. It's still open today and tomorrow. We still have guided tours. So today at 3 p.m. there's a guided tour in English, and then tomorrow at 3 p.m. we have a guided tour in Cantonese, and then at 4 p.m. we have another guided tour in English. And then also tomorrow we have the last talk. We're really, I think, overdoing it, but for this weekend. But we have another great talk, the last talk of the exhibition, where curator Yasmin Afshar will talk about the work of Emma Kunz in the exhibition. So it will be tomorrow at 5 p.m. on Zoom. So you can find the Zoom information on our website and social media. So thank you, everyone. And yeah, have a lovely weekend. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you, Cosmin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.